Hey everybody, and welcome to today's AOP Live webinar. My name is Philip Heidson, and I'm the Managing Director here at Art of Procurement, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kelly Barner. Thank you, Kelly, for joining me today.
Absolutely, Phil. Glad to be here, and thank you for everybody who's either joining us now live or who has joined us later to listen to or watch this on demand.
Yeah, so just if this is the first AOP Live that you have attended, really we've got a couple of very short slides, but it's really all about the conversation and the Q&A that we have. So if you, as we're going through the conversation, have any questions for, or even comments, if you want to throw in some comments, don't be shy, you can pop them in the chat. You'll see the chat on the side of the video that you're watching right now. There is also a Q&A section, which you can submit any questions privately in there. We typically spend most of our time keeping an eye on the chat, so we will definitely be putting in the chat, but we'll check out the Q&A section as well on that sidebar if you do ask any questions throughout the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Now, the topic of conversation today is beyond spend management, how AI-enabled orchestration is redefining enterprise procurement. And we're going to look at kind of unifying procurement objectives. So how do we bring together all the different objectives that procurement has, but actually not necessarily have procurement responsible for doing it all. So we're going to be looking at how do we do that while distributing procurement activities. And that's really a big theme, I think, for a lot of procurement leaders, certainly that we talk to at the moment, is how can I do more with less, and how can I distribute a lot of the activities that procurement may be expected to do within the business, but maintain some control over that and some governance and oversight. So we're going to be talking about all those topics today. Now, we'll welcome on stage in just one moment our two guests today. We're going to be joined by Arif Faruki, who is Head of Procurement at Chime, and Colin Glazier, who's VP of Procurement Solutions at Zip, and also a long-time procurement professional and practitioner before that. So I see you both joining the stage. Colin and Arif, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Now, Colin, we've asked you many times the question, did you find procurement or did procurement find you? So I'm not going to start there for you. I'm going to just ask if you could set the scene a little bit for us today by talking about why it's important for procurement to really move beyond the traditional spend management narrative that we have.
Yeah, I think this is something we talk about a lot, but I think historically procurement had a pretty focused goal of, the procurement process. Procurement was buying things, and buying things was relatively simple historically. Some of that evolved and really became cost savings. Procurement became the sort of leading edge for not just allowing people to procure things, but also helping them get the right price for those things that they're trying to go acquire. That core really was, get things better, faster, cheaper, and really making sure that you're delivering those things to the organization. Over time, there's been sort of this continuous push for, how can procurement be more strategic? How can procurement have sort of a seat at the table? And that's the evolution that we've, I think, anyway, in procurement seen over the last few years, is procurement being more strategic and driving strategic initiatives, whether it's around, ESG initiatives or, innovation and, risk management and some of these other things that are more strategic to the business, or really helping to enable, strategic deals that might be necessary to drive the business forward. All those things continue to sort of take a backseat to that core. And, spend management is at that core, but if we don't push beyond that, it'll kind of continually pull procurement back into it, and it'll make it very hard to really dedicate the time and energy that's needed for strategic initiatives. That's what we've seen. I think maybe that's how the mandates shifted, and maybe how procurement has expanded their scope, and they need to do the right things to make sure that they can focus the energy on that scope to really deliver for the business.
Yeah, I often think about kind of even the word management, somewhat moving away from the management to the enablement. It's not necessarily about, getting your arms around as much as you can so you can say that that's what I do, but more what role can I play in enabling the business to do what they need to do. Now, you've never joined us on a AOP podcast or webinar before, so I will ask you the question that we typically ask at the beginning, and that is just to give a little bit of your backstory. Did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, sometimes people land in procurement accidentally, but that's not the case with me. I started the career as a consultant in the e-business, e-procurement space. and worked with variety of procurement teams at all the clients that we were implementing procurement technologies at. So all those interactions just continued to inspire me about how critical this procurement function is to a company. I still to date think there are two things that our company does. It is they buy things and they sell things, right? So from that perspective, it's a very critical function. And the art of deal making, art of negotiations just really hit home with me. So that's how I continued to move into different roles, variety of different roles in procurement. So I've done procurement operations, third-party risk management, strategic sourcing, and whatnot.
So could you help us with a little bit of context on who is Chime? I know that's your current role today as head of procurement at Chime. So anything you can share with us to give a little bit of background would be great.
Oh, yeah, sure. So Chime Financial is one of the leading consumer fintech here in US and Canada, or North America, if you will. We are about 10 to 11 years old, headquartered in San Francisco. Our mission is to unlock financial progress for everyday people. Currently, our member base is around 7 million, which is continue to grow about 10 to 20% year over year. So quite a fast pace of growth. We are excited and thrilled to be on this journey as Chime continues to disrupt the traditional banking environment.
And I'm certain then with that background, you talked about having background in third-party risk management. That's a big part of what you do, I imagine, within the procurement team at Chime.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most critical function within procurement umbrella, as well as for Chime, because we are in financial services, as you know, a lot of regulations.
Yeah.
We have to while we are not a bank, licensed bank, but we have banking partners who indirectly pass on those regulations to us.
Yeah.
So very, very strategic and critical, and large oversight on that particular process.
Now, I just wonder if you could share a little bit about how procurement at Chime is organized, and what kind of systems are you using today to kind of bring together the entire procurement process?
Yeah, sure. So we are organized as anything to do with vendor. So TPRM usually sometimes falls under compliance teams or under ERM teams, but we move that under procurement. So we have three pillars: strategic sourcing, procurement operations, and TPRM, third-party risk management as well. We did that trial as a just experiment. How would it work? So it worked really well. I think there's a symbiotic relationship between TPRM and strategic sourcing and procurement operations and vendor onboarding. So it really working very well for us. And then from systems landscape, we use Zip for the intake and orchestration purposes. We initially thought we could go with a one glass of paint type of a mindset about 3 years ago, because that has been a large focus or large value prop in the last 10 years, that, hey, we'll buy a big suite and then do everything on that. But then we change our mindset after looking at how this new category has been introduced of orchestration tools, and Zip was on forefront of that. So we started to brand that as a fusion hub or one collaboration hub rather than one glass of paint, where you can come and then start the procurement process. It's assigned to the right people, and then other procurement processes kick off or in other systems, even if they're in the other systems.
Yeah.
So Zip is the orchestration and intake tool. Ironclad is our CLM, contract lifecycle management tool, and then we do purchase order and procurement in Coupa.
Okay, interesting. And I know that we're going to get a little bit more into your journey later into the conversation. That gives us some good context. So thank you.
Sure.
Now, at the beginning of each, or in preparation for each AOP Live webinar, we actually ask a question of our AOP community. We do this on LinkedIn. It's really just a snap poll just to get a sense for where procurement leaders are on a particular question. And so I'm going to read out the question. We're showing it for anybody who's watching the webinar. We're showing it on screen, but for those that may be listening to this later, I'm going to read out the question and the answers. So we asked, which of the following objectives is currently the highest priority for your procurement team? And we built this around process. We asked 3 different choices we gave. One was process compliance, one was process agility, one was process transparency. And so the results of that were that 38% of respondents said that process compliance was most important, 35% said process agility was most important, and 26% said process transparency. Colin, I want to bring you in here, and those are pretty evenly divided results. I just wonder if those kind of align with some of the pain points that you hear from the hundreds of companies that you're working with.
Yeah, I think, they definitely align with what we hear from folks in the field and in conversations and at conferences and such. And to me, this speaks to why orchestration is so critical, because fundamentally, if you're having problems with compliance or agility or transparency, all of those really come down to not having effective orchestration of your procurement process. Compliance, people are not following the process because it doesn't work for them. It's not user-friendly, it's not effective, it's confusing. Maybe they're doing it on purpose, maybe they're doing it just because they didn't know, but it's a user experience problem. Agility, if you're not having good process agility, that means you probably are doing a lot of manual things, or you have a lot of disconnected systems, or you have a lot of disparate processes that are running in silos. And then transparency, if you don't have a front door, if you don't have a platform that's helping you do that, you're going to have a lot of transparency problems, and you're going to hear it from end users, you're going to hear it from cross-functional stakeholders, and you're going to feel it in your own team when they're constantly fielding sort of where is my thing conversations with everybody in the business. So all of these things really, to me, triangulate at an orchestration problem, and it's 100%. We hear all of these in different flavors from different customers, but it's kind of the trifecta of problems that come from having effective orchestration.
And what's interesting for me with orchestration is that you don't need that you're not focusing on one of those in a silo. That you can have compliance and agility, whereas before it was always a trade-off of having compliance, and that's going to impact my agility. That may impact my transparency even, but now you can actually address all 3 of those at the same time. Arif, how would you rank these for Chime?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty simple. Agility is the top of mind criteria, because that's how we look at the end-to-end process, or the process spectrum. Agility meaning there's no one size fits all. The process is catering to the business needs. If you're buying furniture, that's different than buying some SaaS tool, right? So ability to maneuver the process and cater to the business needs, and simple enough or easy to use. Compliance is embedded, so it is always top of mind, but it is embedded within the process functionality. We use the word quite often that make compliance easier than non-compliance. So obviously there's no two thoughts that we have to be 100% compliant or strive for 100% compliance, and it has to be embedded within the process on all different type of processes that we have established. So that goes hand in hand. And then transparency, I think that's also extremely important and top of mind for us, but that's also function of process, overall process orchestration. With again, I would say that Zip provides that transparency quite well. That once you start a process, what are some of the next steps are. Who are those next steps assigned to? And it's a visually appealing graphic interface. So end users don't really worry too much about who do I go to, where did it go to a black hole. So that's where I think I say all these three are important. But if you look at through the lens of process agility and try to cater to your business needs and business users' expectations, I think the other two should be embedded within that.
Maybe RF, maybe one follow-up thing here. I think this has been a great story with us and the Chime team and RF specifically. But I think you're dead on about the process agility. But I think maybe one other part of that process agility has been that we've been able to work on a lot with the Chime team is agility of updating the process as your team has grown, as you guys have. I mean, you guys have been customers for 3+ years now. You've gone through a couple different iterations of changes to your existing flows and your process inside Zip. But how has that agility been with updating things inside Zip and being able to keep the process up to date with the changes to your business?
Yeah, great question, Colin. So 3.5 years ago, we are probably one of the first customers of Zip. So at that point, we did think about it. Initially, we brought it on for just IT purchases. IT purchases were sort of all over the place. Pandemic really fast forwarded our growth, or we start, there was exponential type of effect of a pandemic on our digital banking business. So there was a lot of growth in those days, and that's when we had onboarded Zip to just manage the IT procurement. But then we started to look at it. Should we look at a one-stop shop type of a suite of tools, or should we continue to expand Zip as our standard and preferred enterprise tool for all procurement intakes and all procurement orchestration? So number of discussions, lot of discussions with industry leaders, Zip consultants, Zip leadership, our internal leadership. So we decided to land and give Zip a chance about being that front gate and provide us that orchestration and provide that compliance that we were looking for, that, hey, everybody comes to Zip to start the process or come to one place to start the process. So at that point, we did work with the consultants to tweak or implement the best practices in our environment. And again, I was surprised at how quickly we were able to do that. It's a bit of a, I would say, no code type of a environment. So it's not that typical environment that you have to do all your requirements, then you create a project, then the consultants come in and start coding, then you move from development to some other system environment, then another environment, then you keep testing, and then the things happen in production, and then when you find the bug, then you go back into dev. So it was quite refreshing to see how modern this system, how it's architected, that you can make many things updated or enhanced in a day's time or in a week's time that would take like months or several months with traditional approach. So having said that, our first iteration was good, and then we continue to iterate on that. That's another beauty of a system like Zip, that you even if you didn't implement all your requirements in the tool in the first place, you can iterate, you can continue to improve and enhance. So we are probably a third or fourth iteration in the past 3 or 4 years, and now we are even expanding to other features and other areas in procurement.
Arif, if I can jump in and actually ask a follow-up question to that. So when you talk about the iterative process, and I know you shared some of the information about what's in the Chime tech stack and how you pull all of that together, how do you factor into that sort of the end user experience, have a positive feedback loop so that as you go through those iterations, you're making sure that yes, it's achieving company objectives. Yes, it's achieving procurement objectives, but it's also working for individual buyers. How do you go through and make sure you're pulling in their feedback as you go through those iterations?
Great question again, Kelly. So in a tech company, tech environment, I think that's usually table stakes, that the ease of use would be there. The processes would be simpler, because that's what we are doing, right? That's the DNA of the company, right, that you're making things easier for everybody out there through our products. So that's usually the internal guidelines and internal expectations, and you have to meet those expectations rather than coming across as a back office procurement person. You have to be able to talk to them in a more of a cutting edge, bleeding edge way. So I would say that the iterations worked well in terms of continuing to make things easier and easier for our end users. The way we look at it, if end users, business owners, budget owners, if they're able to really use the systems well, our procurement team would adjust to it, even if there are any things missing. But in this case, there was nothing much was missing. There was only thing that I think we continue to still iterate is the integrations with other systems, and I think that's one of my thinking that is in this space in our ecosystem as well. If tools are talking a little bit more effectively with each other, we do punch out is an old word, but again, we do launch Ironclad from Zip. So that sometimes becomes a little bit of a I think it's a difficult step to grasp for our end users. So we do provide some help there, but otherwise things are working really well. Another thing is that the audit trail is built into the orchestration tool. So in the past environments, in order to just document a comment, it would take quite an exercise about how do you document, what did you approve, why did you approve, or if there's a question, how do you answer that question. But in this environment, the collaboration is built into the tool.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a question by end user, they can ask right there, and somebody would answer right there, rather than going through starting a ticket process and anything else, or trying to chase down the person who would answer that question or solve the problem for them. So it continues to stay fluid. The process continues to moving along really well. And again, we have surveys built into the tools as well. So after they finish the request, they can provide feedback. Hey, this didn't work or this did work, and we go and focus on that. Because otherwise, believe it or not, because of the end user expectation is so high, the bar is so high. If we are not performing to their expectations, and thanks to Zip and other tools, we are able to get there and meet their expectations.
So that feedback survey isn't just about the platforms or the process; it's the overall procurement experience. Is that what you're saying?
Overall procurement experience, yes, to a degree, but we mostly focus on were the steps logical in the process? Were you able to really follow through the process? Because we can't open it up from that perspective that how was your experience with TPRM process, right? It is just, it's the nature of the beast, case to case basis, it could differ. And again, even if you think about negotiation process, it is sometimes takes 6 months to 8 months. Sometimes it could take, 2 weeks or 1 week. So it's all varies. So we don't want to focus too much there. We set the expectations differently on those processes with the end users. But the feedback loop, we make sure that end users are not lost. They're not saying, hey, this is not working, and I don't know where the process is at any given point in time. They always know where they are in a process and who that process step is assigned to. I think that's where the biggest value proposition is.
Now, Colin, as I listened to Arif talk about how strongly emphasized the user experience is, the high expectations in that area, although I will tell you, Arif, I've been around long enough to know what a punch-out catalog is. So I know a lot of the technology has moved along to be more user-friendly, but as we think about some of the new things that procurement is bringing in, the new approaches that are bringing in, should we at the same time be looking at tech, process, procurement habits, even objectives, and figuring out some of the more traditional areas of focus that it's time to move beyond or let go of? Do you see companies going through some of these shifts as maybe the tech even moves to an experience beyond what they had known they could create? Are there some more traditional things that you're starting to see fall by the wayside?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things. For whatever reason, it feels like procurement has lagged behind in terms of using certain pieces of tech. I as very recently in my career used Excel exclusively for any sort of sourcing, Excel for vendor management and tracking, contract databases, in the last 6-7 years. So for whatever reason, procurement's been resistant to using tools, leveraging technology to really become more efficient. And I think there was almost like a little bit of a, badge of honor of being sort of this team that was like very hands-on and like in the weeds and talking to people a lot and being sort of a human connector and being a little bit of the elbow grease to get things done. I think there's a shift that's happening where procurement's sort of realizing so much is being asked of procurement teams that like it's really, really not sustainable to continue sort of leaning on very manual things to get the job done. So, AI is a big accelerant to that, but I think more importantly, looking at the things you're doing and being really honest with yourself on, should this be a manual thing? Should this be something that should be automated, done away with, or just removed from the process? And I think as we see people going through these sort of procurement transformation projects, we or even building procurement from the ground up, people are being a little bit more direct in terms of cutting some of those things out, increasing spend thresholds, cutting out manual steps, and just saying we're not going to do this anymore. We're only going to look at contracts that are at this level, and just being more decisive with those things, which is the only way that procurement's going to get out of that tactical spend management mode that maybe was historical and into the strategic, because more is being asked. You've got to start making some cuts before you can really free up time to do those high level, high impact projects.
Now, if we focus on the influence that AI has had in this whole journey, I know you mentioned it a moment ago in terms of expanding the capabilities that all these tech platforms offer us, but are there some specific things where AI is being embedded, adopted, and it's really having a very targeted impact on procurement processes?
Yeah, I think probably like maybe 2 or 3 areas. One is specifically anything around the sort of the data entry, data gathering, metadata extraction process, whether it be pulling information out of order forms and putting it into systems to create a PR, pulling information out of SOWs, out of contracts. All of that is a highly manual step. And I think every procurement person I've ever talked to has been involved in or led a contract database refresh, where it's like, we have this Dropbox folder, we're going to get it all loaded and in this pretty format, and it lasts as long as like a month, and then it's almost immediately out of date because you're not getting the data out real time. So human nature is, if it's something that can be forgotten or left off, it'll happen, and then your data is now immediately out of sync and not comprehensive. Other areas, just chatbots obviously leverage a ton of value. A lot of what procurement does is sort of telephone operator. Where's my thing? What's happening with this? How do I change this? What's the procurement policy around X? That's another huge area where the technology is there. You can have a procurement document loaded, and the AI functionality can easily parse it. You can ask it a question, they'll tell you the answer in seconds rather than making you read through a 30-page doc.
Well, I can certainly appreciate the being able to keep sort of the old folder structure business need up to date more than a month, because those efforts do take a lot of time that procurement does not have for that sort of activity. And then it's instantly out of date. Arif, when we think about so many of the business needs, business processes, things that continue to change and that you want to make sure systems are able to keep up with, have you seen places where having intake and orchestration has allowed you and your team to be as agile and responsive as the business needs you to be, as things both inside the company change and potentially as external conditions change that you need to respond to?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest value proposition is the scalability, how scalable the system is. Because if think about it, if we are growing fast or a fast growing company, buying needs are increasing on a daily basis. If there's no orchestration or intake tool, things would start to go to people's emails or Slack channels or calls and other things, which is almost impossible to manage. So in this way, the request comes through one area. And from that standpoint, we can figure out what's the load workload is, how and the what type of request could be categorized into what type of a work effort. And then it's an easier case as well, how to scale up or down your team as well, mostly up in our case. So there's also then again from where I sit, I need to be able to figure out, is it the category resource I need? Is it like a onshore need, offshore need, procurement ops need? Can this be done this way or that way? So I think you just have to be extremely on top of the needs of the business and how you be able to respond and entertain and enable the business. And I think these tools are helping us, and we just trying to make sure we use them as effectively as possible.
As you talk about scaling up your team, is there either whether it's a tech roadmap or just a longer term strategy that procurement is working in alignment with? Sort of how far in advance do you try to strategize and plan? And is there anything specific about that longer term vision that you can speak to in a public forum?
Yeah, for sure. I think the way to look at it is like, how can we be more strategic, as Colin mentioned before as well, in terms of anything meaningful purchase? How can we have strategic sourcing coverage to that particular spend area? So more we are on the table with our business partners and C-suite and talking about the deals upfront or the needs, or why are we even buying this? Sometimes we get engaged really late in the game. So we don't want to do that. We want to get engaged sooner in terms of why, rather than what we are buying. We say, hey, why are you buying this? And then that gives us the idea of how do we really go and source that particular spend product. So from that lens, you look at it 12 months, 6 months out and say, hey, this is where my business is growing. These are some of the needs. This is how I need to staff it. Luckily, the business case is not as difficult for a procurement resource from a strategic sourcing perspective to be rationalized, because more spend we touch, more meaningful spend we touch, I think there's more impact to our bottom line. So that's, we continue to strive for that. And then you just want to make sure the strategic sourcing team is focused on the strategic items rather than chasing down the intake requests or trying to answer calls or hallway discussions about, hey, what is coming down the pipeline. So this helps us manage the pipeline. They focus on those things. And then we also just talk about how do we really make sure that staff the procurement operations team well. So I think that's also comes hand in hand with this discussion.
And it's interesting too, Phil, because we were just having this conversation about preparing procurement to go into C-suite meetings, right? Mm-hmm. And be prepared with a message that's going to meet expectations, potentially challenge the business. And all of that is happening sort of at the same time that we're having this real moment, I feel like, within the procurement tech stack, whether it's the development of intake and orchestration or whether it's the embedding and adoption of AI. We're constantly trying to challenge the people in our community to imagine the art of the possible and think differently about the things they're trying to achieve and the role they play within the business. Do you see sort of like a connection here in terms of both procurement aspirations at that C-suite conversation level and also in terms of the growth and maturity of what our tech allows us to achieve?
Yeah, what's interesting to me is, when we're talking about a more modern procurement tech stack and what it enables is both an efficiency and an impact play. So from an efficiency perspective, we can talk about obviously doing things faster, having more information at our fingertips, better capturing data and all those things. But really, and that's great because we're always being challenged to do more with less.
Yeah.
But it's really the impact side, which is more exciting of how can we more effectively influence the business and help the business make decisions which help them become more impactful and more effective in using technology to do that. And I think about how is this kind of changing what our operating model is for procurement? From a procurement perspective, we've the typical kind of process is we have a decentralized team, and then we go and we centralize it all. And then once we've centralized it all, we realize that's too much control. So then we go to center-led, which is we want some control, but we're willing to give a little bit back to the business. But actually, where do we go beyond them? What's beyond center-led? And that's when you start thinking about, in one regard, where can procurement be invisible? But then where does it make sense for us to be really front and center and having and focusing truly on the much smaller kind of areas where we can have the biggest impact? That's what I think we need to be thinking about as, not an efficiency play on its own, but okay, so we have, devolved a lot of activities and responsibilities back into the business. What does that mean for the time that for the resources that we have to be more impactful in the stuff that's impactful for the business? That's really, in my mind, what we should be thinking about in the journey of what's possible. Is because if we don't do that, we can be efficient and then we've got nothing left to do.
Yeah.
And that's the risk. So you want to be efficient, but then you want to play into, now I can have all this impact because technology is enabling to get more information, to have more insights, to be able to, be more predictive, to run scenario plans, to do all these things that we don't necessarily have the opportunity to do at scale at the moment. Now, I want to just touch a little bit more on the journey, Arif, that you've been at Chime. But before I start there, I actually just noticed that we have a question from Mike. And I want to ask this because I think it's a question for you, Colin, more than anything, but I want to make sure that we cover it. Mike asked, I know that when intake and orchestration was kind of built initially around really indirect services, indirect materials, but are there now use cases that you see in more going into the direct materials or raw material space?
Yeah, no, definitely see more and more direct use cases. I think specifically around, most of the time, direct use cases are going to be, we get involved with customers that are using it to get initial approval for, let's say, a new design, or for design sign-off, for sort of that initial, most of the time you don't need continuous sign-offs to buy more parts for your product that you're building. It matters less there. But on the development side and sort of the initial sort of, innovation side of things, definitely lots of customers using the procurement workflow tools and our tool to sort of validate and get the right sign-off. And then I think on the back end of it, most of the time the purchasing of those things is handled by a material planning product in ERP. But there is a huge opportunity in that front end. I know I felt it when I was at Apple. There was a lot of weird email exchanges to try and get people to sign off on something, and Excel forms that people had to stamp and all sorts of weirdness. Would have loved to had something like this where I could easily just go see, hey, did everybody sign off on this at the right time? Yeah. Great. Here's the attached docs that are stamped. We're ready to go.
Now, I remember spending a lot of time in the manufacturing in automotive on pre-production and innovation. And as you say, all very manual based. There's oftentimes communication challenges between engineering and commercial in what's being built and the budgets that things are being built to. And then a lot of ordering for tooling or for, initial pieces are all done very manually.
And RFPs and sourcing, right? Sourcing is so huge on the direct side. Yeah. And really that's where most of the procurement effort goes, is that front end and picking the right supplier and picking the right, parts, the right manufacturer, so that you can then say, good, we're done. Once you get to production, you're not doing a lot. It's mostly just, yes.
Well, thanks for your question, Mike. Thanks for your insights, Colin. And if anybody else does have any questions as we go through the next kind of 10 minutes or so, please do pop them in there. We'll keep a look on that. I want to come to kind of the change part of your journey. So once you decided that intake and orchestration is going to be something that we want to really invest in and build our procurement capability around, what kind of change management initiatives did you have to consider when you started to, one, put that into play, but also start rolling it out? I think when you started in kind of a controlled environment around one specific category of spend, but I'd love to know what you had to do from a change management perspective to get buy-in from the rest of the organization.
So Phil, I think that's another value proposition here. If you go with a easy to use interface, there's not a whole lot of traditional training you have to undertake in, not like videos after videos, as well as training sessions after training sessions, lunch hours, and I've done all of those.
It sounds like you've done it all when you've been doing procurement tech implementation.
Bag lunches and everything. So in this case, yes, you have to advise people, end users, about hey, this is how the end-to-end works. This is your place where you come and answer questions about it, and then we'll review something and then provide you feedback about how long it's going to take and what else is needed and how we go about the next step in the process. So from that standpoint, I think that takes one element out of our shoulders, or the weight of training from our shoulders, where somebody's just sitting there and just keep churning out the training material and keep updating that training material. Here, even when we go through the iterations, we don't really go through a full-on enterprise change management type of a project. We announce it, we tell them what's changing in the process, and then we also say, call us, if you need anything, if you get stuck anywhere. But usually it is refreshing. They're pleasantly surprised whenever we roll out something and they're asking for something already, and then we embed it in the process. Without even just saying, hey, we'll be going dark on Monday or the weekend before the go live and whatnot. It's just like, we flip the switch, thanks to Zip and our consulting team there at Zip. So works out really well from that perspective. But again, the focus then becomes more strategic, right? How do we say that, hey, you come in here because you're doing this? Because, whenever you think about spending something, you come to this place and then start to tell us about what you need to do. So that's the guideline, or the conversation has changed from what it used to be.
Yeah, and by the sounds of it, you have, because we talked earlier about really, low code and no code allows you to make changes quickly. So it's great from an agility perspective because you can continue to test and experiment and then quickly deploy. Do you find that that's kind of the update cycle that you end up going through? Is, you're taking feedback and you're able to turn that feedback into, changes to, how you deploy the technology in a relatively quick cycle?
Yeah. So my own team have business analysts. They are able to change things in the system, obviously not during the day, but off hours, meaning questions, conditions, triggers, who needs to approve what, if the approvers are changing, how do we change that, approval nodes or approval chain or sequence of approvals, parallel versus serial. All that can be done by a business analyst. So again, it's fairly straightforward. If we have to create a new workflow and something, we have our own tech team, IT team. They can take care of that administration type of role. And then outside of that, we can work with the Zip team to get some of these things implemented. But as you mentioned, it is different. These modern systems are much more different and refreshing than it used to be.
How does IT feel about that? Do they feel like this is great because procurement can be in control of their own environment, or do they look at it and think, I'm not sure if we want non-IT folks playing around with systems?
Great question, and definitely an adjustment. So we have to do a RACI about what are some of the things we can do ourselves in a business analyst role, and what are the things where we would come to IT and open the ticket or have that conversation with IT. Where we go to IT where there's usually a bug or something larger scale, right? And they could either try to solve it themselves or work with the vendors team to figure that piece out. But the IT's role is also up leveled, right? It's more strategic now. They're thinking, hey, how can this intake orchestration can work well with the other tools? And how can we provide more dashboarding, more capabilities, reporting capabilities, or transparency to our end users? So rather than they just sitting there trying to add this field and a condition, their role has also, I think, become more strategic.
As you reflect on the journey so far, what are some of the key things that you've learned that maybe you weren't that you hadn't planned for, or that you didn't see at the beginning, or just maybe it's just been a confirmation of what you expected, what you're going? But I'd love some of those lessons over the last couple of years.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that question. So I didn't think that we would be almost like 100% compliant with this process.
Yeah.
I thought it's one of the processes we would just still have to chase down the users and tell them to come here, or they would still continue to come to different areas, or just keep signing the contract outside of procurement process or legal process. But surprisingly, we are almost trending towards 100% compliance in terms of every request comes through the process, and it provides us so much spend visibility, so much more capabilities in terms of categorizing and staffing the right way, going after the deals the right way. So I think that's definitely an externality of the thinking at that point 2 or 3 years ago. But the reason of being compliant here is, again, the same thing, making process or compliance easier than non-compliance. They find it easier to just go there and answer questions rather than just calling somebody, chasing somebody down, or directly talking to suppliers and trying to do something. So I think that's one of the things that we learned through the process in a good way.
So the what's next then, and that can be, leveraging, enabling your team to, be more impactful because of the technology they can have. It can be, how are we going to think about expanding the use of our technology? I'd love to know kind of what your forward thinking is.
Yeah, so it's continuous improvement. That's the mindset. Just don't get complacent. Last year we didn't think the AI would be coming into this environment so much more, so much faster.
Yeah.
We didn't have it in our 3-year plan that this is how we'll deal with it. So I think right now all eyes are on it, how AI can make our lives simpler. There's so many use cases, just from the SLA management to just even payment terms optimization and figuring out how that works. On the third-party risk management side, huge use cases in terms of questions that are sent to the suppliers. And when the suppliers send tons of documents back, do I really need to sit down and read every document and those be summarized? So those are some of the huge use cases that we are just going to work on, work towards, and try to see which are the best solutions out there in order to enable us become more productive and effective.
Well, it was a great point you made on AI. And Colin, I want to bring you into the conversation to talk about AI. As Arif said, it wasn't necessarily clear a couple of years ago that AI would play such an impactful role, or the change would be that we would be embedding and implementing AI across the procurement tech stack so quickly. I know that's something that you've done a lot at Zip over the last 12 months or so. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about what role does AI actually play in the intake and orchestration process?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a little bit before, but that front end, sort of the ability to have a conversational chatbot to ask questions around the procurement process and what's happening and interact in that way. I think the big one that we've seen the most success with is easily the parsing of documents. There's so many documents involved in the procurement process. So our Docs AI allows us to scan SOWs, MSAs, order forms, and extract the information out, and not just dump it out into fields, but to extract it out and for an MSA to highlight key risks. Like this contract has an auto renewal. This contract has termination for convenience. Like highlight the things that you would want to know, and do sort of almost like, we're not going to replace the lawyer, but we're going to give you that first scan. So commercially, you know what you're getting into before you maybe go bring in a legal resource. And then the other piece is the contract uploading and contact metadata parsing. So you've got a bunch of signed contracts. We've had customers that have come to us with thousands of signed contracts that were just sort of in a folder. We have the ability to ingest that information, ingest those contracts, extract the metadata, and then have it all be searchable and stored, organized by your vendor in sort of our contracts storage database inside the platform. Massive win for them. That's usually a 6-figure consulting project, and it's something that turns into sort of a work stream in the implementation that's just running.
How have you found that? Or should I rephrase that? Do you find that your procurement teams that you're supporting, they're bringing legal into that process? And if so, kind of how is that received by legal? Because I think back to, my practitioner days, and some legal teams were very hands-off. and some were extremely hands-on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in between. And so I just wonder how that's kind of it's helping procurement, but it's stuff that maybe legal would have helped with before. And so I just wonder some of the interactions you've had with legal as you've kind of built in some of that capability.
I think you're right that legal, sort of the personality of legal departments within different organizations varies quite a bit. Some of them want to touch everything and only want to be the ones that are touching things. Others are more than happy to have help. We even have a variety of customers in a variety of industries that have either embedded legal resources or have sort of carte blanche to run their own contract review process below a certain threshold. So it's literally legal hands off below 100,000. Which was sort of new for me, but very effective. And with the right checks and balances and rules of the road in place, can actually be very effective for those legal teams. Legal teams are stretched super thin, just like procurement. There's a million contracts, sales contracts, vendor contracts, and others. They get buried, and if they can offload some of that work, it allows them to work on the bigger strategic deals and allow procurement to be self-service on the ones that are more tactical, and as long as you have the right checks and balances in place, can be very effective.
Now I want to go finish off with the last question, really going all the way back to the beginning of we've talked about implementing orchestration, intake and orchestration, some of the benefits, some of the lessons learned along the way. But Colin, this one again is for you, for organizations and for folks in organizations who are listening today that don't have intake or orchestration.
Yeah.
Is there a best place to start, or a best place to be thinking about? This is use case number one that we should consider. I just wonder if there's some common denominators, or whether it's truly organization by organization.
Ooh, yeah, good question. The interesting thing is we have a lot of the same conversations and same pain points and challenges from our Fortune 100 customers on down to our customers that are 50-person startups.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty ubiquitous problem, which is it's those three things we start out with: process agility, process compliance, and process speed. It's all those things sort of put together. There's no real variance between those things. I think when you think about how you roll it out, or maybe when the right time to do it is, the sooner the better. As soon as you can start getting the data, as soon as you can start doing things, you're going to be better off. You can take an iterative approach, like Arif mentioned earlier that they did at Chime. We have customers that start with a smaller use case and build up from there. We also have Fortune 100 companies that went live with a full big bang procurement front door. Everything comes through Zip on day one. Success with both models. It's more how your organization wants to handle the change and the transformation. But I think the biggest thing is, as soon as you start doing it, you'll start getting more learnings and data and feedback. And it is a sort of a flywheel of feedback loop. What's working, what's not working, and you can kind of make those changes, look at the data, and make a lot of really insightful data-driven decisions.
I think you saying a flywheel is a really good way of putting it, because I think with anything that is, and I don't want to say new now, because orchestration, intake and orchestration has been probably 3 or 4 years. Like Arif, you said you started in 2021, so it's not that it's brand new now. It's just continuing to grow and iterate. But in these cases, it's once you see it in action, you start to get other ideas, and that's I think where some of the flywheel comes in. Is pick a use case, then you understand what the art of the possible is based on that, and then you can kind of expand the vision from there. Now, I do see that a question did come in. I think this is from Mike as well, who asked, and either Colin or Arif, feel free to jump on and answer this. During a renewal process, so I'm imagining that's a contract renewal with a provider, can Zip give you historical data on that contract? So what's happened in the past, what's been negotiated, any risks that have been identified? Colin, you're nodding, so I'm going to let you.
This is sort of the vendor profiles span. This is one of the benefits of having a sort of an end-to-end platform, is any previous requests that have come through for that vendor get stored on the vendor record. So you can go in and see every single request that's come through if you have the right permissions, if you're sort of an admin, or if you're on the sourcing team, or the right teams that have those granular permissions. You can see all those. You can go into those requests. You can see the chat log that happened there, the audit trail, any of the documents that were uploaded. So yeah, you get a real great view of the vendor, what risk assessments were done, what the scores of those risk assessments were, and then also you can see what documents the vendor uploaded. So let's say they uploaded a W9 and SOC 2. You can go see those documents still on the vendor record in perpetuity.
Yeah. And is this something that AI, I don't know if it does it today or whether, I feel like it can certainly do it in the future, can kind of give you that snapshot of, this is the relationship in a three paragraphs to kind of pass it all down for you.
Oh yeah, not something current, but yeah, you could easily see how you could just scan, all the things that have happened, any feedback that's been given on the vendor, and sort of parse that all into, an exec's going into a meeting with, AWS.
Yeah.
What's happened with us in AWS in the last year? Easily something that is kind of core to AI functionality.
Well, I know we're coming against time, so let's wrap things up by, first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today in this conversation. And thank you, Arif, for sharing more about your journey at Chime. It's great to kind of hear real-world examples of change and of transformation that's driven by technology, because it really helps contextualize the opportunity, I think, for a lot of folks, and also, helps on avoiding any pitfalls that you've learned along the way for anybody else who's in the same position who's going on that journey. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Colin. And thank you, Kelly, for helping pose some of the questions as well. We'll be back soon with another AOP Live. You can always check out the events and activities we've got going on the Art of Procurement website. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.